I am Sal Soghoian, and thank you so much, MacTech, for having me back again to be part of your family and to present. I really appreciate your hospitality and your kindness, and it's a great experience to be here always. Last time I was here, I was talking about the idea of automating the setup of iOS devices using Macs. And I went into detail about how you could set up your own system using Automator and Apple Configurator. And we covered a lot of detail, and at the very end of the talk, I demonstrated how you could even automate Jamf processes using this connectivity thing. And it was all about attaching a device and then something happens. So today, I'd like to go to the step beyond what I did previously. I'd like to take it from where I left off and show you what's new, what's coming up, and why it's there and why it's important and how it came to be. And I think you might find it interesting along the way. So let's begin. This year has been very tumultuous, a lot of turmoil. Everything seems to be changing. Everything seems to be in flux, not only with the climate, but in politics, economics. Everything seems to be in a transition right now. And it all really got to me when I saw this picture. How many of you have seen this picture before? So a good number of you, but a lot haven't seen it. Let me explain a little bit about it. It's not a bunch of people waiting for a new iPhone. This photo was taken by the gentleman down here near Mount Perja, and he's a professional mountain climber. He climbed 6 of the world's tallest peaks within 1 month. He's absolutely amazing individual, but this is on Mount Everest. And this is above 28,000 feet. This is a line of people waiting to summit Mount Everest. And I looked at this photo, and it just was stunning because I realized the enormity of what this is saying. This is at 26,000 feet, you enter something that's called the death zone. And your body, once it hits that altitude, whether you're breathing oxygen or not, starts eating itself, and it starts preparing to die. And eventually, if you stay in the death zone, you will perish. It's just a fact. Humans are not meant to be at that altitude. And everybody in this photo, in order to be at that point on the mountain with the sun shining, they had to reach the base camp 4, which is above 26,000 feet in the death zone, the day before. So these guys have been in the death zone for 24 hours. And another thing to realize is the standard protocol is if you fall down or something happens with your equipment, everybody walks around you. Because at this altitude, they don't have the energy to be able to pick you up and to help you. So they go around you, and that's standard procedure. A lot of people will make the summit but not get down. You're not guaranteed to come back down once you do get to the summit. So I'm looking at this and I said, what in the world is happening right now that this is what's going on Mount Everest? There's got to be some kind of thing happening in the world that this is what we've gotten to. And it got me thinking about stuff. And I have this formula that was passed to me, and I will now pass it on to you. And it's a way that I get perspective on stuff that helps me to understand big picture. And the formula is this. Insight is gained through the application of perspective over time. And if you look at this formula and you apply this formula, you can better understand what's going on. So I said, okay, let me take a look. Let me step back and see what's happening then. So here we are. We're somewhere right around there under some cloud cover. And This amazing photo is available to us because of a project from NASA that is the Deep Space Climate Observatory, and it has a camera called EPIC. And the interesting thing about this particular satellite, I'll call it, is that in order to get perspective, they've placed it 1 million miles away from Earth with the sun to its back, another 93 million miles to the sun. So it always sees the Earth fully lit by the sun. And it's very interesting that, you have that kind of perspective. And if you're watching, you can really find out something about it. And they have a website. This is the URL for the website. And you can go to this website and type in the date that you want to see what was happening on the Earth. And so I went to that, and I just grabbed the photos, and I put them together to make like this video. And I picked a period this year that was very interesting. Things were happening in Europe, and I wanted to see if I could understand better what was going on. So I downloaded these pictures, and I put them together, and I started to realize something, that they experienced incredible heat. They had fires. It was just all over Europe. There was temperatures above 100 degrees in Paris. And all of this had followed an incredible winter where they had freezing like they never had before. And I started looking at this, and I started to understand that there's some change going on, important change. And it's obvious to see that this change is happening, it's real, and it's causing other things to affect, because we don't live in isolated little vertical columns. Everything we do is related to each other. Our economies are related to things. The structures of our society, everything is related together. So I said, okay, well, if that's true, why don't I take this perspective idea and see how some things that we are affected by have changed over time. And the first thing I wanted to look at was cars. Now, cars, especially to American, are a very important thing to our lives, right? And they've been around with us since the beginning. Americans are all about cars. But at first, they were kind of like basic functional boxes that would take you from A to Z, right? If you were rich, you could have a fancy car. But most people, it was just like a utilitarian kind of device that would take you from one place to another. And maybe that you had a sedan with 4 doors or something. So we get to a point where they're selling these cars, and the people that are making these cars, and they're going, we need to sell more of these. So how do we do that? And they started all of a sudden putting personality into cars. Cars started developing an image. It was an expression of the real you, the inside of you. It was who you were and what you were all about. Your car started to become an expression of your individuality. And then with the creation of the interstate system, we got the open road. And they started talking about the open road, the joy of being on the open road, where you had the power and you could ride off into the sunset. And the epitome of every American's dream was to be with their partner riding down the open road and headed off into the sunset. And that's what it was about. And you would think that with all the changes that we've had now, with the introduction of electric vehicles that have sensors that can tell all about things that are around them, they can know where they are, that they can be programmed, and they're running on electricity. You'd think that we would be talking about those, but when it comes to marketing those and getting us excited about them, we still use the same kind of thing that appeals to us. You're going down the street, you're driving over here with somebody else, you have no idea who they are, and you go and zigzag back and forth, and you're headed to San Francisco in the distance, and it cuts to the sky. It's still that same kind of approach. In reality, this is what it is. There's San Francisco, and that commercial was, this is Alameda Airstrip, and it was filmed partly over there, but mostly over there as they're heading off into the distance. That's the reality of it. But as another example, here's Ford with a commercial filmed right across the bay, too. This is for the new Steve McQueen Bullet, a special car designed around that. Listen to that. How can you not want that? It's just like, it's Steve McQueen, for goodness sake. You got to have that car. And there it is. It's like up the ramp. It's headed off to the bridge. It's going to go across the bay or across to Marin. But in reality, the reality of it is this, and those that have been to San Francisco know this very well. If you're headed across the Golden Gate Bridge, you go left. If you're headed to the Bay Bridge, you go right. And it looks like this all the way up till about 11 o'clock at night. And it lets up until maybe about 3:30 or 4 in the morning. But that's the reality between the image and the reality. And all of our bridges there now are packed all the time. Like there's the Bay Bridge and there's the Golden Gate Bridge. And things are getting pretty dense when it comes to cars. And part of this is because more people are moving there, but there's also a trend happening in the world, and it's called urbanization. And about a third of the population over a 100-year period is moving from the rural areas to the cities. You combine that with just the normal population growth, and you start having this density. So it's made people question, do I even want to own a car? Because having a car is such a pain in this dense urban environment. Do I even want to own a car? And that's brought up the idea of having Uber and Lyft and people like that and taxi services to try to have them be your means of transportation. And some enterprising companies thought, well, we'll steal some ideas from Woody Allen's sleeper movies, and we'll see if we can make, driving gumdrops. And then they decided, well, I don't want to actually be seen in that, so they started making them cooler looking, right? And they have the idea of self-driving cars, and they're creating fleets of these with the hope that someday these will be the vehicles that pick people up and intelligently, efficiently, without traffic and without accidents, somehow manage to get through San Francisco streets and take you where you need to go. Now, they're already out there. This is the Chevy GM Cruise fleet that they're using. And they're already out on the roads in San Francisco. And in some locations like this in Singapore, they're actually in use. So people are thinking about this whole thing of car ownership. And it's interesting. What I learned from that was we went from this idea of cars were this commodity that was an expression of my identity into becoming a service. All of a sudden, the idea of I needed to own a car became I don't want to own a car, I want to lease a car or have a car pick me up. And that was an important change. This was a big change that happened over time. Let's take a look at another topic, computers. Now, for all of us in this room, this is the foundation. Whether you started on VAX systems or whatever, you crazy people out there, you guys, this is spiritually our beginning point, right? We'll all agree on that. And then over time, we've all experienced all the different iterations of this, and we've enjoyed each one, and we've enjoyed investing in the company and spending our hard-earned money and ogling and wishing for each one of those as they came and go, it can't get any cooler, it can't get any cooler. Until right now we have this wonderful, very efficient, high-powered feats of engineering that are the Apple product line. But along that way, there was another transformation going on as well, and it had to do with the software that was driving this hardware. When we started with OS 10, and it was a Unix-based operating system, and it iterated along all this process of hardware. It stayed as a foundational aspect to enable all of this development. And even though we're in a new era here with Catalina, it still is Unix-based. It might be appropriate to ask how much longer they're going to allow access to stuff or things like that, but that's a question for another time. Right now, it's still a Unix operating system for our purposes, right? So the real important thing that happened over time wasn't just the hardware. A real important event happened when they released this. That was a foundational change, a paradigm shift. All of a sudden, you had this wonderful device, computer, that was running Unix that you could carry with you. And it was this wonderful new touch interface. And this really changed the way how things worked. And with its cousin, the iPad, Apple made sure that it integrated with what you had as hardware. And you had this wonderful independent device concept where it was your data works across all of your devices. Your data works all across your devices, and isn't it cool? You have photos that are organized for you, and it automatically makes you a video. And all of that was meant to make this a cohesive thing for personal use. It was your personal device. You loved each one of them, and they served you well, and you couldn't wait for the next one. But at the same time, Apple had a different strategy that they were executing. And the strategy that they were going to execute, they had to do in plain sight. And they did it very, very well. And it began based upon an app architecture where Apple decided to create an enterprise platform. And the things they needed to do were foundational. They needed a new programming language so they could get rid of some of the cruft that they had before. It's been an ongoing process, but with each iteration, it gets better. They had to redesign their IDE and come up with different concepts for that. They also had to really focus on security, not just because of personal privacy information, but because corporations would demand that. And if you offered corporations security of their data, they would be attracted to that like moths to a light. And that's why that became a primary concern. In addition, they really embraced the idea of mobile device management, because this way, organizations could manage thousands of devices. And if you're going to have an enterprise platform, you better provide them with a way to do that. And while you're doing it, figure out a way to distribute apps securely and know where they're going and who's getting them. In addition, document it very well. So this was Apple's strategy that they started executing while they were telling the public about the integration with iOS and your Macs and how everything worked. This is what they were working on. And this worked big because they also partnered at the same time. As the second part of their strategy was partnering. And Apple did not have the relationships with the different enterprise organizations, but they had friends who did. And so Apple started developing relationships with all of these companies, like GE, that makes incredible turbines, engines, and things like that. They developed a whole programming architecture based on Apple's tools that allow their devices to talk to machinery. Salesforce, a huge presence in the enterprise, has an entire development platform for their app developers based upon Apple's IDE and Apple's tools. Same story with IBM. IBM brought back-end systems like Watson and Cloud to Apple's platform, enterprise platform. So right there you have three different companies that are basically betting on Apple's strategy. They're investing in their future and their customers' future and embracing Apple's strategy. And that's powerful. And my favorite is SAP. I love their logo, how everything's like crammed in there. Because if you look at this slide, it fits their logo. This is really dense, but if you actually look in there, you'll see that SAP is using Apple's enterprise architecture as their development platform too as well. And you'll also need people to implement. So you go to people like Deloitte and Accenture to help other companies adopt this kind of strategy. So you develop these partnerships. And even Cisco, gets into the game with Apple partnering with them. Here's a school in Kansas, Shawnee Heights, where they developed a secure Wi-Fi system so that the students' data wouldn't leak out or be able to be grabbed by somebody else. So there's Apple and Cisco working together. Even Cisco, a networking company, gets in the game of partnership with Apple. So that's really powerful. So we've seen that Apple develops an enterprise platform hitting key points that companies require, and then goes and starts partnering with the key players in the enterprise business. Now, the question is, who are they targeting? Who are the customers? And there's a lot. And all of these are things that we think about and go, oh yeah, that makes sense, but we really don't think about the scope of what Apple has done. And I'd like to just go over some of these. A couple I'll pay a little bit more attention to than others, just to give you an idea of the scope that we're talking about what Apple has accomplished here. Let's look at aviation. So there's 3 places in aviation where it's obvious that iOS devices can be really valuable and contribute. One is in the cockpit. Having a flight bag that you've seen pilots used to carry those things of 40 pounds of paper, and they'd be in the cabin before you take off. You look up there and you could see they're opening binders and swapping out paper and stuff. That was perfect opportunity for change. And here's David Clark, who's a flight operations manager, and he's talking about an iPad for American.
The first time I used the iPad in flight was the realization and the culmination of about 3 years of work. And everything that we thought was possible actually worked out well. The convenience, the efficiency, obviously the iPad is very light compared to 40 pounds of kit bag. The ability to update in 2 or 3 minutes the content each week. And the ability to move between charts effortlessly. We realized that this was going to work well and be well accepted by our pilots. In fact, there's several examples of how this is more efficient than our paper products previously. For example, if we were to change destination and hypothetically we wanted to go to Atlanta instead of, say, a New York destination, I can call all the charts up for Atlanta that fast. These are all the charts for the Atlanta airport immediately available for me, selection, with one touch, and there's the approach chart.
So, perfect example, totally logical, right? If pilots, you could fit everything on an iPad that is handed to the pilot before he gets on the plane. It has the latest data, the latest information that he needs, and it's right there and easy and searchable. A second place that iOS devices and Apple devices can be used is in maintenance. And for example, here's a gentleman from United Airlines.
The iPad application was developed specifically for United Airlines with input from technicians across all of UAL's hubs, says Nilsson Pan, Director of Technical Operations.
Basic information that we would usually sit at a computer and do maybe 40 or 50 different transactions to get that information now is on one click on the iPad itself. And all that information is right there for you. So it makes the technician's job so much more easier.
He says new technology also means information can be passed on in real time, so technicians are ready even before the aircraft arrives.
So perfect example, right? They can use the communication architecture to talk to the other maintenance guys, and they can reference materials that they need for a specific type of plane. The third place that iOS devices are really useful in the aviation category, vertical, is in customer service, of course. If you have customers, they have problems. That's just the nature of business. And you can use these devices to help solve your customers' problems.
In 2010, we introduced the mobile boarding pass. We decided we need to do something for our colleagues. Flight Info is the first app that we released using iOS. It's a list of all the operating flights for the day. Previously, colleagues would be given a printout, and as soon as they left the shift briefing, that piece of paper was out of date. So we decided the colleague needs to have the information about what's going on in the operation in their hand, so that when a customer speaks to them, they have the information there and then.
With the Flight Info app, we can actually see on the iPad the arrival schedule as well as the departure schedule. And it also gives you the facility to track the other airports around the world that British Airways serve.
The next app was for the senior cabin crew member on the aircraft, and it replaced the paper passenger information list. So the PIL app was developed and deployed. It's been great because it means that the senior crew member can speak to the customer on a one-to-one basis.
Having that data at your fingertips in the moment means that you can interpret what needs to be done right there and then, and that really matters to a customer.
So, perfect example of having all of that data and being able to communicate and maybe make an alteration to a customer's flight plans or reservations right there in the aisle. That's really impressive. And that's why the aviation industry has really become attracted to that. I mean, you have all your big players, United, British Airways just announced 40,000 units that they purchased. United purchased 11,000. Southwest is using them. American, Singapore. It's become a standard in the industry, and you can't really think about going back to what it used to be because now it's so much different. It's so much better. It's so much more improved because they're adopting Apple's strategy. And I saw this the other day because this was a local airport up in Washington, D.C., and it blew my mind. This is Reagan Airport and at Dulles Airport. You'll notice that they walk up to the iPad, it checks into the TSA database, does facial recognition, and it's now the new boarding architecture. So in aviation, there's a lot that can be used, and you're looking at hundreds of thousands of devices. Law enforcement is another great example. If there's anybody that you want to have the most current information about you possible, when you're dealing with them, it's a law enforcement officer. And law enforcement is embracing these things as well, and it also provides an opportunity for like third-party apps. I thought this one was pretty interesting, that it translates common phrases the law enforcement officer would use into Spanish, like it can read their Miranda rights, ask for their license and everything. They just tap it and the phone will say what they want to say in there. And I thought that was just a great example of a third-party app supporting law enforcement. This particular picture is from the New York City Police Department, who recently adopted 36,000 iPhones. So their officers every day go out on their shift armed with the latest information and the latest apps and the latest data, and they take it with them every day. So it's not unusual anymore to see one of New York's finest and they have an iPhone in their hand. That's just part of their strategy now. If you look at retail, of course, iPads and iPhones make a lot of sense in retail. And there's many retail companies have their personnel using iOS devices. It just makes so much sense. In a related field, food service. Somebody can use an iPad to input an order, or now we're training customers to input their own order using an iPad, right? Or if you do have a point of sale, it's probably just using an iPad architecture. And some restaurants just went crazy, and they're doing iPads everywhere, right? And in the hospitality industry, like we're in a hotel, you'll see those all the time. I've become to see them more and more. When I was recently in Sweden, I stayed at the Riverton Hotel, which I like because it's on the water. And when I checked in through an iPad at the front desk. And then when I went for a meal, I was handed an iPad mini that had all of the information about the food, and I could order right there. It's become, some hotels have taken advantage of the architecture of iOS, and now your phone can actually unlock the door to Marriott through a secure communication, and it will open the door to your room. And when you get in your room, there's an iPad that controls all the temperature, access to all your information, your phone calls, your messages, everything that you need is on another iPad. Manufacturing, of course, you have these huge spaces with a lot of information. Carrying an iPad is absolutely essential. Same thing with construction. I have a friend in San Francisco who builds skyscrapers. The guy actually builds skyscrapers. And he and his team have iPads and they communicate together. And if he wants to look up, the building schedule on some rivet of a beam that he's standing right next to, he can do that. That's essential. It's just become part of the common strategy and part of the common vernacular. And one other area that's really taken off is healthcare. Because you want doctors and nurses and attending physicians all to have the information, but you want the patient to have that too. I know I've had my set of procedures, like we all probably have, and I had an app like this at the hospital, and I could see the results of the blood draw that they took 20 minutes ago. I could see what was going on. And that's really important. At Cedars-Sinai here in Los Angeles, they even use their iPads for newborns when the mother is in recovery. This way she can see the baby and talk to the baby. And as a matter of fact, I recently, this morning I was having breakfast and the gentleman across from me was telling me about the hospital that he works at.
Geisinger made a strategic decision to use Apple and iOS devices across the hospital because it takes friction out of the care process and it improves the experience for patients.
The screws link the two pieces of bone back together. It's like bringing
the mission was not to just continue the way healthcare had been practiced to date, but really to think about what's the next way we can take care of patients. So what we do is we give them iPads so they can be better connected, better engaged while they're in the hospital. With My Chart Bedside from Epic, they can check their labs in a way that's understandable for them, and we use it to teach patients about their chronic condition. Before an operating room procedure, particularly for children, we use iPads as distraction therapy, which reduces the amount of sedation and pain medication the patient has to receive. And we know that means that the patient recovers faster. In the neonatal intensive care unit, iPads connect in the mom who may not be physically present with the baby through FaceTime. This is the time when they're supposed to be bonding, and they're being pulled apart because the baby's sick. That interaction is huge for the baby and the parents.
Mama's here.
Our purpose is to take care of our patients. You can't do that unless you're supporting your doctors, your nurses, and other members of the staff. The iOS platform enables people to do the jobs they're supposed to be doing better.
So, is Matthew here? Can I get a mic for Matthew? Matthew, please stand up. This is Matthew. He works at Geisinger Health Systems, and he's the IT guy there. How many iOS devices are you guys working with?
Right now, it's just over 10,600.
10,000. Wow, that's pretty impressive. Have you noticed that had impact into the kind of care?
Oh yeah, everybody says it's much quicker. Our doctors carry them everywhere they go, so they can do their charting and everything right there. They don't have to go back.
And you're having a good time working with all of the Apple equipment, all the hardware. It's really solid for you?
Most days.
Thank you for telling me about your company and allowing me to put this in there. I appreciate it. Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks for using it.
Thank you. So, yeah, applause for Matthew. So, there's some of the verticals, there's some of the customers that are using this Apple strategy, that have bought into it. And we're seeing another change and transition Like we saw with cars going from these must-have personal devices to services, now we're starting to see this whole concept of these individual devices becoming appliances. Now, appliances is a weird word when you're talking about computer equipment because you're going, oh, what? What's that? You know, is that a bad thing? No, it's actually quite a good thing because it allows Apple to have access to all of these different markets and serve them by creating great tools that change the way that they work in a positive way as well. But it's hard to get excited about, you know, having an iPhone that used to feel really cool about having, and if you had it, you could dance on one leg with an earphone in, or Bono would sing to you if you had a watch or something. You don't think about washers and dryers and appliances the same kind of way. It doesn't take away from the value of what those devices are, but just how they're being used. They're being used as appliances, and that's okay. Because what that means is that Apple is selling a lot of stuff. And that means Apple has a good, solid future ahead of them. They're just scratching this market now. And it means that we can rely on Apple being there. And Apple's going to be prosperous. And they're going to continue to innovate. So it's good that they have all of these sales. And by the way, I challenge anybody to find a picture of an iPad, a palette of iPads. I don't think you're ever going to find it. I think they're like hidden. They're not allowed to exist or something. So this is the best you're going to get for that. So that means you're going to have a lot of large-scale and small-scale deployments. You're going to have some that are just a couple hundred devices, or 100 or 50 or 20, some that are thousands of devices, as he said they had 10,000. So when you deploy these, there's some challenges. Some of it can be labor-intensive. You can have procedures that take a lot to set the device up. Some of the processes that you have in place at your company might not be scalable too easily. And sometimes you have location and network problems. Like if you're on an aircraft carrier out in the Pacific, you don't have the kind of network bandwidth that you're going to do over-the-air JAMF MDM with it, right? So you have to have a different way of approaching the problem. Sometimes you need to get large amounts of content on the device quickly, and that's a challenge as well. And then you have to maintain the device, make sure it's always in good operating order. And then there's the human factor, because at the end of this all, at the end of every device, there's a human being using it. And human beings have various levels of efficiency and knowledge about particular devices. Somebody might have inherited a group of devices to manage just because somebody else left in the company. You know, some people are professionals who can manage thousands, some people aren't. So you have this human factor, and all of that plays into this. So when we're thinking about how to make this as easy as possible to manage, a consistent thing that we've found is that people respond to the idea of attachment. When you plug something in, something happens. People understand that. It's a fundamental human principle. Plug it in and then walk away. And with that, that was what I was talking about last year, when I talked about how to use Automator and Config, CFG util from Apple Configurator and Automator to create automation processes that allowed you to access all the different aspects and setup for iOS devices. And we went over the different strategies about how you could create a terminal session that did it, or you could create a launch agent that did it. I'm just reviewing the kind of stuff we went over last time. And we decided that with a launch agent, we created a simple launch agent, and we could have that run the setup and the automatic execution of workflows just when a device is attached. It's a localized thing that you store in a system folder, in a launch agents folder. And I gave you a special tip on how to create shell scripts that could control this whole process that you could put in the scripts folder available for you. Do you remember that? And in addition, we had a command file that was our bit of magic glue, and it just basically took the environment variables from the attachment and passed them into the workflow that it executed and allowed it all to run. And of course, we had an Automator workflow that I showed you how to create. And all of that together enabled the process of attachment. And there was one special thing where we had an automator action that would prevent reentry problems, because when devices connect, it would create a little stub. And then during the processing of a device, it will often disconnect itself and then reconnect. And when it does, it could launch the workflow again, but this little automator action prevented that. And that was our secret, and we also designed it so that it would do load balancing. So you could handle more than 1 or 2 or 5 different USB devices across that bus at the same time. And that was basically the strategy. But now, all of that's gone away because we have something called the Apple Provisioning Utility. Last time I was here, Apple was just starting exploring this. And now they've modernized this whole architecture. It's no longer dependent on Apple Configurator. It has modern communication. It can transfer data very fast. It's created by the Apple Professional Services team, and there's how you can get contact with them if you want to talk about it. And it's just a phenomenal tool, and it's all based on attachment, and it can handle up to 40 devices per Mac simultaneously. You just plug it into a card of Macs, and it will go to town. It takes minimal setup. You create an automator workflow, and then you just indicate that that's the workflow you're using. It has a dashboard interface that you can project to a TV if you want to. It has no Wi-Fi requirements. All of your network connection can be done through the computer, which is great if you're concerned about security and you don't want updates or anything happening where people can get to them in Wi-Fi. It's wonderful for that. And then it has content caching. So you can have gigabytes of data right there and transfer it onto each device very quickly. And it has secure and fast data transfer, and it's all on attachment. Now with content caching, that's, for the last couple system releases, that's been built into the operating system. We'll have a content caching server in the sharing preference pane. You can turn it on, and once it's on, you can choose what kind of content you're going to keep. You're going to keep system updates, apps, media content. All of that's possible to keep and store and have transferable to your devices. And you can set the settings for your cache size. So on the Mac that's running APU, you set up that, and then all you have to do is create an automator workflow, because Apple Provisioning Utility has its own set of automator actions that cover all the standard processes that you want to do, like erase, restore, update, prepare for device enrollment. All those kind of things are available, and you can just create the workflow that you want. Like this basic one here that begins with a provisioning. It has a stagger mechanism so that it will automatically stagger the devices so that they don't overload the bus. You can erase the device, update the device, prepare for automated enrollment, and end provisioning. And that would be the standard workflow like you would run. And in addition, you have all of these other automator actions, and you can customize using run shell script action that handles all the standard shells, and you can have your variables coming in as standard in if you like, or as arguments. And using that, you can call CFG util, and you can have like this one that renames the device using the device serial number. Here's an example of removing a specific configuration profile. Here's one that does the device health check. And remember last time at the end of my talk, I showed how you can even execute Jamf attribute extensions by just connecting the device. And it will change your MDM and change the device just by connecting. So there's a lot of customization that you can do. And some of the standard workflows that APU is used for is like, here's one for the police department device provisioning. This is like their standard workflow that they would do. And one device, one piece of hardware that's running APU can provision 120 devices an hour, which is like 960 a day, 4,800 a week, or 19,000 over a month. So just one unit can have a tremendous impact at a precinct. Here's a workflow for a medical center. These are kind of the standard workflows that they use. Here's a workflow for a retail health check on the devices that their salespeople use. All of these are just standard workflows you create in Automator, and then APU will run them for you. Let me show you what APU looks like. So here's the interface. You have a workflow button, then you have a status button. It's like yellow if it's processing, green if it's completed, and it will highlight if there's an issue. Then you can see what percentage of progress is done, this device serial number, any kind of feedback about the processing. In addition, you can see what Automator actions being run, the device name, device type, all of the version, that kind of information is available, and what slot in your hardware that device is occupying, and that's important. So let me actually run one here. I'm going to pick a workflow, and I have this totally sped up, and it's going to process 10 devices. Normally it takes, you can fully process and erase a device usually in anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. And that means wipe it, re-enroll it, MDM it, copy stuff over to it, the whole thing. It's pretty efficient, and it's just all based on attachment. You don't have to, once you've set this station up, then you just plug in. And that's important because it might be a nurse that's doing that. It might be somebody that, they clean the iPad and they put it in the rack and it starts it. Or it might be a police officer that comes in from their shift and they take their phone and they stick it in a rack. And the attachment happens automatically for them and starts processing the device. You need to have a common denominator about how you can use this to set it up. It doesn't mean that you can't also use this for if you have a palette of iOS devices and you want to do initial setup and enrollment, you can use these APU to do that too as well. And you can work your way through that palette of devices very quickly as well. And you can see that they're becoming green here. The one that had the problem that needed to be trusted is probably the last one up there. And they're independent. So as the employees see that the green button is there, they can walk up and just take the device away. So that was like 10 different devices. And it has all of that ability for it. And you can project it to a TV screen. So if it's in the back room of your retail shop, you can just look in and see if you have a green button that you can get it from. Apple provisioning utility is quite impressive. It has a lot of advantages to it. You can do zero touch, you can do MDM, device health check, all of those features just by plugging in the device into a piece of hardware. And as long as I'm talking about the piece of hardware, Bradford has just announced a new type of hardware tray. Here's this particular example right here is set up in the foam for iPhones, and it can handle like 20 different iPhones. It has a Mac Mini integration. It has APU-controlled LED indicators, so the software in APU can flash the lights to be whatever it needs, so you don't have to have a screen to look at. You can just look at the tray, and APU can be telling you which device you want to use. And it does simultaneous charging as well as sync. It's quite unusual, quite powerful, and the next step in device management. It's really impressive. Now, as far as what the future will bring, I will note that Macs fit into racks as well. I'll just make that observation. So, we've seen that the world's in change. And sometimes, that whole concept of change can be unnerving. But when things are changing and they're unnerving, there is something I always rely on, and it's friendship. And you can count that the friendship that you find here at MacTech, we can solve problems together that we can't solve by ourselves. And it's the friendship that you get here that makes the difference in the end. Thank you very much.